are learning a lot about ourselves right now, and some are looking for a new path in life, and that can be really difficult to do without some guidance. So here with a healthy way to cope with life's difficulties and how to move on is author Ernie L. Vecchio. He is joining us to talk about his new book. Great to have you here, Ernie. So what inspired you to write this book at this time?
Wow. Well, I had spent my whole career working with trauma, and I had discovered that there was a gap between how we think is how we feel, and medical science was saying what you believe you become, right down to the cells of who you are. And I noticed that this gap just was getting larger and larger and larger, and it was coming at the expense of our emotional and spiritual lives. And so that prompted me to write the book for that reason alone, because we've kind of moved towards the thinking part of the equation instead of the emotional feeling part of it.
I think a lot of people are going to be interested in this book. So you talk about human suffering and self-correcting. How is human suffering self-correcting?
Well, it's really pretty cool, actually. The body, if you cut your arm or something, it sets out to heal itself. Well, the human psyche does the same thing when it experiences trauma. If you want an example of that that's kind of current, look at where you were before the pandemic. And where you are now, because that determines how you're coping with the present moment is where you were before. So the psyche initially tries to heal itself when it's traumatized. The thing that gets in the way, of course, is the human ego. And if you ask a large percentage of the population to point on the body where the human compass is, most people point to their head, when actually the human compass has always been the heart. And so that battle between those two is really the challenge as you do your day-to-day lives. Yeah.
And you talk about your work being the missing piece in the mental health model. How so?
Well, because we've kind of taken the approach with people that all we need to do is just reprogram their thinking, and then their problems will kind of go away. And the truth of the matter is, we're all walking around with some kind of internal wound of some sort, and changing your thoughts about that isn't going to heal it. And so it's very important that we learn the distinction between compassion, which is kind of a transforming approach to self-love, versus this idea of being a victim, and which is compassion described as murder. And so the distinction between those two ways of defining compassion is very important. And I noticed that in the hospital, that many of my patients did define compassion as martyrdom and sacrifice, which I thought was very curious. And so we have to kind of learn that true compassion means to sit with ourselves without judgment and to allow something else to come through, which is larger than ego, of course.
And you talk about life as it is and is it intended? So life as intended. What is the difference between the two? Life as it is and life as intended.
Yeah, it's a great question. Life as it is kind of what the ego says, the personal and collective ego. Life as intended is really what your soul or spirit is kind of pointing towards. Or if you want even a thing that kind of fits the book is that your heart points towards a true north. So the ego struggles with right and wrong, where the heart struggles with true and false. And again, those two competing things are kind of always at work inside of us, with the outside collective ego really trying to get us to give in. And so if we're not careful, then we just have our egos kind of dragging our hearts around, because the ego will submit when it's being pulled upon, where the ego will dig in and fight its position. So this idea of using your heart as a compass is a big deal. And it sounds like it would be easy and a no-brainer, but a lot of people don't realize that.
I think we all constantly have to remind ourselves in those little parts of the day where it's easy to say something in our minds about somebody else, unfortunately. And so what determines the possibility that everyone has that capacity to be mean-spirited?
Well, I think that what happens is we come into the world kind of whole and complete, and we make up as soon as we arrive that we are separated or cut away from life. And then shortly with the onset of language, which is around 16, 18 months, we develop an ego. And then that ego undergoes guilt or shame. There's really no way around that. And then we become divided. So what we end up doing, which is kind of a profound but wrong thing, is we merge separation and division as one event. When in actuality, we are just experiencing the division. What I say in the book is that we are spiritual beings first, forced to live a psychological reality. And that adaptation, if not examined or looked at in any kind of way, is debilitating. As they used to say on the road less traveled, that the path forward is inward. Well, what I'm trying to do with this book is to remind people of that, and it's something that we've kind of forgotten in the past, 2 or 3 generations of folks. Yeah,
this book can be very much a compass to a lot of people. It's so great to talk to you this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful being here.
And if you would like to learn more about Ernie's book, Feelings and Reason, Activating Your Heart as Compass Despite the Ego's Interference, you can visit ernievecchio.com.